Hey everyone, welcome to the Sustain the Range podcast. I'm Lauren, your host, and this podcast is a personal exploration of my experiences in everything ranching. From beef operations to training horses to sustainable farming and regenerative practices, we'll cover it all. Each episode features enlightening conversations with guests who bring their unique perspectives and expertise. Whether they're seasoned ranchers or first-generation farmers, we all share a common bond and deep appreciation for the land and the livestock we raise. Tune in for engaging discussions, inspiring stories, and practical insights from the ranching community, and let's embark on this incredible journey together. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sustain the Range. In today's episode, I sit down with Fiona, who is the ranch manager at Redwing Ranch in Gardner, Colorado. And we get into everything from custom grazing to sell-by marketing and what it actually looks like to run a flexible, numbers-driven ranch in today's cattle market. So I had first met Fiona when I went to a stockmanship clinic 2 years ago now at her ranch, and truly just loved everything about being there and learning more about their operation, how they were approaching things at the time, and just their open-mindedness to things. They have a great group of women that work there, and you'll get to hear a little bit more about that in the episode as well. We talk a lot about custom grazing, what it means to really know your cost of production, and how being flexible, even making big decisions mid-season, has allowed their operation to stay profitable. We dive into a little bit of the sell-by marketing and just talk a lot about ranching mindset and the ranching community and the importance of not being afraid to do things differently than your neighbors. Talked a lot about this idea of possibility for people who didn't grow up in ranching, or for those who are wanting to start something of their own, and for anyone who believes that there is a space for them in this industry and are willing to do the work, that it is possible. So anyways, I hope you guys really enjoy this episode with Fiona and her perspective, her mindset, her just super positive attitude and practical way of looking at things. Just a lot of ranch talk, and I really enjoyed speaking with her. So anyways, I hope you guys really enjoyed this one. Thanks for listening. All right, Fiona, well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you coming on today and being on this episode. I know that our listeners are going to really enjoy hearing from you. I think it's going to be a great conversation. So welcome to Sustain the Range podcast.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm super excited to be here today.
Yeah, so I like to always give people a chance to just first introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about you and give a little background of yourself and kind of where you grew up, if you grew up in ranching, if you didn't grow up in ranching, and kind of how you got your start. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Give me 1 second. I'm going to kick these dogs out of my house. Just like, this would be like cut for half a second. Okay, so a little about myself. I grew up in the Bay Area in California, and definitely don't have an ag or ranching background. Both my parents are jewelers, but have always like hiking and being outside and things like that were always important to us. And both my mom and dad are great cooks, but I really kind of got my start into ag when I went to college. I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I studied ag business there, and I got a sustainable ag minor there. And when I was at school, I worked on one of the farms at the university. And then I also took an internship on a ranch that's a partner ranch with the university, and totally fell in love with those things. And then kind of from there, when I graduated, I was like, gosh, I just want to work with my hands. And so I took an internship on a large vegetable crop production farm in Northern California for a year, which was awesome. And I loved it, but it was very physically demanding in a very different way than ranching. And while I was there, though, we had these animal blocks where 1 month at a time, you'd only work with the animal manager and just work with the animals. And it was mostly hogs and chickens, and they had a couple cows. Oh, and they had a lot of sheep. But I just totally loved that because it was very physical, but so different every day because they're animals, right? And from there, I remember sitting in the office one day after work, scrolling on my phone, and I'd seen on Instagram about this like direct-to-consumer course that this farm was selling, and they'd anyways tagged all these different ranchers and farmers that had attended the course. And so then that's how I found out about Flying Diamond Ranch, and that's a big, large cow-calf operation, like 5th generation, using like holistic management practices for 30 years. I didn't know any of that at the time, but I then, from that internship in California, kind of like made my way out to Eastern Colorado, starting on that cow-calf operation.
Nice. That's amazing. And then, so how long were you there for? And then when did you make your move to Redwing?
Yeah, so I initially got hired like in March for calving out like 250 heifers in May. And then it was kind of going to be an 8-month deal till around Halloween because they shipped all their cows to Cornstalks in Kansas. And then that turned out to be 3 years. I totally fell in love with ranching and the community out there and got a ton of experience on that operation because it was so large and because they did a variety of different kind of like livestock enterprises. And then in the beginning of 2023 in January, so almost 3 years ago, I got hired on here at Redwing as the ranch manager when my boss, Christy, came back to Colorado. She's owned the ranch for maybe almost 20 years, but had a long-term leasee for 16 years that was doing some like set stock grazing and wasn't super excited about trying regenerative kind of principles and shaking up how things were done. And so that's when Christy hired me on to take the ranch in a different direction. Yeah.
Wow, amazing. That's really cool. So for our listeners that might not like totally understand or get like the holistic management, regenerative kind of lingo, can you just explain a little bit like, and if you want to take your experience from like Flying Diamond or what you're doing now, like in terms of holistic management, what are your like key things that you're looking for? What are some of the things that you're doing that like really set you apart from like other operations that might not be doing that, if that?
Totally. Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing between Flying Diamond and Redwing is just the scale that we're working at, but a lot of the similar practices. I can speak to Redwing, so like I started using temporary electric fence in half-section pastures and split those down into 80 acres, so you've got these like quarter of the total acreage they're only grazing at one time, and so you're able to increase the stock density and kind of get those cattle to stay on a higher plane of nutrition throughout the entire time of those 4 sub paddocks or that entire paddock in my mind, because by increasing that density you kind of force those cattle in a lot of ways to like eat the good stuff, eat the medium stuff, and maybe eat the bad stuff. But because maybe you're moving them in 4 days time, that plane of nutrition doesn't have time to like drop off. So in my mind, it's like very small kind of increments of up and down, where if they were to stay in that pasture, let's say for like 16 days, maybe the first week they're eating the best stuff off the top of everything. And then that second week, that plane of nutrition is going to kind of fall off pretty hard. So in my mind, some of the tools we're using are like using temporary electric fence to target our grazing. We've got a lot of water been fortunate on both the ranches, but I think we've got like over a mile of live water at Redwing, so like river and whatnot, and then we've got probably around 20 stock tanks or ponds that have water in them all year round. And so we can have like these smaller pastures and have more watering points so that we can like have more uniform grazing on the ranch. And so that's something I'm really excited about. And then I'm a total numbers person. I love Excel. So we're actively like calculating, and like like how many stock days do we have in each pasture? And the ranch is super variable. I think we've got like 13 ecological site descriptions. It basically means we've got shortgrass prairie, we've got PJ forest, we've got sub-irrigated riparian areas. We've got like historically irrigated alfalfa fields and like some upland cross. And so it's super diverse. So coming from Eastern Colorado where everything is shortgrass grama for miles and miles, dialing in the grazing has been something that's super exciting. And then not only like making a grazing plan or saying, gosh, we're giving our shortgrass prairie 18 months rest between grazing it, but like looking at the animals and looking at the land to really inform those decisions of like when we're moving cattle. So it's been really exciting to kind of like get those numbers dialed in even more after now a third growing season of grazing. Yeah.
I was actually going to mention your spreadsheets because when I met you and I went to Redwing, you showed some of your spreadsheets and I was like, wow, this is impressive. The amount of data that you have and how color coordinated it was and how organized it was. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome.
Yeah. And I mean, there's definitely like death by spreadsheet or PowerPoint or any of those things. So I feel like it's super important that like the numbers that we're using, we're actually like then using them to inform like our management decisions for like the next grazing season. But I love my numbers.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Thank you so much for explaining it. I think that gives a lot of great context, you know, because people hear those words all the time and then every place is so different, right? Every ranch operation does it a different way. So I always love to ask people that question. So could you explain a little bit now about Redwing and the operations that you guys have got going there? I know you do a lot of custom grazing. So could you just tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing there?
Totally. So when Christy hired me in January of 2023, when she was like in the process of making the decision if she was going to hire me, she was like, gosh, and if you did get the position, I'd love for you to come to this conference with me. And I was like, is this ranching for profit? And she said, yes. And I was like, oh my God, I've been trying to save up money to go. And so like my first paid week of work was going to Ranching for Profit with Christy, which was phenomenal. And then we like drank the Kool-Aid. We're just like, this is great, and joined their alumni program called Executive Link, and that met in February. And so in February, right, I'd really been on the ranch for like about a month at this point. We came and we were like, gosh, like what type of cows are we going to buy? Are we going to buy like Coriani cows because they're a little bit lighter and we can then like run more of them and kind of like things like that. And our EL board was like, well, what about custom grazing? And it was funny. Both Christy and I are like, what's custom grazing? And which is so funny now, but that's really how we got our start. It was a way for us to, and I guess I could define custom grazing, right? It's like an agreement-based grazing between a livestock owner and like a ranch operator or a grazer for like a specified amount of time. And so like it doesn't necessarily mean you have to own the livestock or own the land. So we started custom grazing in that first year of kind of operation of what Redwing Ranch is today. And so we brought on 2 separate clients' cattle and then ran them through the growing season, which is the summer for us in southern Colorado, and then had more grass. And so we actually then brought on some neighbors' pairs that are just 5 miles down the road and did some like fall winter custom grazing as well. And that's kind of where we started off, like, and we thought the market was high in 2023. In retrospect, it's even just gone higher and higher and higher. But it was a really great way for us to like get experience. And in my mind, like, yeah, I had been ranching in Eastern Colorado, but it's pretty uniform in a lot of sense, where here we've got like irrigated ground and sub-irrigated ground. And a little context, numbers person. A quarter of our acreage of the ranch grows 90% of our total stock days. Quarter of our ranch is like super duper productive, and then 3/4 of the ranch is like shortgrass prairie or forest and things like that. And so like getting the experience of like grazing out here again, like in that first year without having to commit and buy cattle was awesome to kind of like get going. And then from there we kind of like we're like, well, this is great. And like the low risk and the low startup costs and all of those things were fantastic. And so then in 2024, We also did custom grazing and ran more stalkers in the summer, and they put on about 2 pounds both years. And so that custom grazing client was super happy. And then this past year, we actually did a joint venture with that custom grazing client. And so it's basically like a partnership without the legal ties of it being a partnership. But we went a 50-50% joint venture or ownership deal on the cattle that we ran this growing season. And so we had a group of stalkers on the ranch, and the initial goal was to like stock 500 of them, and the market just got so insanely high that in March we actually kind of like changed tacks because we couldn't get them bought right, and we reran our numbers and kind of reevaluated, and we're like, gosh, if we can buy these late bred cows, so a cow in her third trimester, probably on the older side, for around $2,100, and then we kind of like looked at if we can sell like a 350-pound calf and just sell her for like a cull cow, slaughter cow price come like September, October. The numbers were like totally making sense for that. And after running those numbers, 2 semi or maybe 3 semis actually showed up of cows that next week. And we totally changed up the grazing plan for the 10 millionth time and ended up running 2 herds this past growing season.
Wow. Yeah, because I think when I was there, you guys were just doing the custom grazing for one client, I think.
Yeah, so we were just running custom grazing stalkers for that client, and then they'd been so pleased, we'd been so pleased, and so then, yeah, decided to go into a joint venture with them and then ran these 2 herds. And we're actually custom grazing right now. Our neighbor that has cattle 5 miles down the road, this is the 3rd year that we're bringing on their cattle for kind of like fall winter grazing. And I guess back to the custom grazing, it's such a great way to kind of like flex when precipitation and forage can be like so variable. And so like we've got extra forage, and so we felt like it was appropriate to bring their cattle on, and they're only probably going to be here. They came at the end of September, like 60 to 75 days. And initially our hope was to like do another short-term cattle ownership kind of little buy here in the fall and get something on our place. But we're really feeling like if we've only got 2 to maybe 3 months of forage, we weren't really feeling like that was enough time to put on these animals or get ourselves in a sticky situation where we're like buying hay. So we were like, let's just bring on these custom cattle. That's some more cash flow. And I'm really excited about remote ranching. Like, how can we increase like the overall gross product for our business without that necessarily being on the acreage of Redwing out in Gardner, Colorado?
So if you don't mind me asking, so when you guys have that split with that client, do they go back to the client's place? Like, does that client have their own property for them to graze when they're not at your place?
Yeah, I guess I could back up a little bit with the context for the 2 herds. Both of them were kind of, in my mind, like short-term ownership or like sell-by marketing. We're trying to buy them when they're undervalued and then sell them when they're overvalued. And so the stalkers, we sold them. We actually sold... Oh, geez, we shipped off like 450 head off the ranch on September 10th, which was a very busy day. But we bought those stalkers starting in December through March, and they actually went, to that custom grazing client's backgrounding yard, and he's been backgrounding them for 3 months or so. And then come May 1st, they came to grass at Redwing. And then they got shipped off the place September 10th to the buyer. I think it was a feeder out in Kansas. And then for the pairs, they came out of eastern Colorado, Lahana, in the end of March. They kind of calved May, June, July, August, those sale barn cows, but mostly May, June. And we were able to put some weight on them, and they had a calf at their side. And we kind of got worried that they might fall apart if we kept them into the winter, just not really knowing these cattle. And so we kind of did a private treaty off the ranch deal and got them sold to a guy out in eastern Colorado that has like a bigger operation. He's got a feed yard and whatnot. And so he was able to put some of the calves with his calves, and some of the younger cows he's able to keep, and some of the older cows he was able to feed them out a little bit, and that worked really well for us. So those animals, in my mind, weren't like fantastic genetics or breeding stock that like we have like this Redwing reputation on. More than anything, it was kind of like identifying classes of cattle that we felt like could make us money and then like meet our ecological goals.
Nice. Okay. For the custom grazing part of it, so 2 questions there. What's been the biggest challenge for you guys to custom grazing? Because you mentioned like not knowing some of the cows, and I can imagine that when you're getting some of these cows and you have not been around them before, or even like funny because you know sale barn cows, what's been kind of like the biggest challenge for you in terms of that?
Yeah, they're at the sub bar and there's a reason, right? I would say, gosh, we use portable electric fence polywire with all classes of cattle and for all the custom grazing. And I'd say like making sure that first week that fence is really hot is super important to get them to respect it. And yeah, you have kind of some wild ones and whatnot. Like our custom grazing lease agreement is actually super favorable for the ranch operator or the grazer. I'm going to say ranch operator because that's like the legal term we use in the agreement. Okay. Where like if we have an animal that gets out of permanent barbed wire fence more than 3 times, we can call up the livestock owner and they have to come take that animal off the ranch completely at their expense. Basically, no questions asked. We've never had anything like that happen, even though we've had some hot animals. So I guess challenge-wise in my mind of like custom grazing, and honestly why we've moved into also like this short-term ownership, is like ultimately the gross margin on that animal is only and I guess it depends on how long they're at your place, but like for stalkers that are here for maybe 120 days, it's gosh, I want to say like let me crunch one number really quick. Okay. But thinking about the margins on custom grazing for stalker cattle, it might only be like $150 a head, where if you owned those animals, it should definitely be higher than that. And so ultimately, like we kept running into the issue of like, we can't run 1,000 yearlings even if we wanted to and had the grass because of our water constraints. And so that's been an issue. And so actually grazing separately both in the growing season and in the dormant season in the fall and the winter has like been a way for us to kind of like have more animals on the place without like being constrained water wise. We have a ton of water, but 1,000 yearlings, like you need 2-inch pipe to that tank. And a lot of our infrastructure was set up initially or built for like 150 cows. So I'd say that's kind of been a constraint for us. And again, just like the gross margin being on the lower end for custom cattle versus like owning cattle, and having that really be a margin-based business.
Yeah. What would your advice be to somebody? So say they want to get into an operation, right? Or they want to get into some sort of custom grazing operation. For now, they're just starting out. They want to graze cows. They feel confident, because I've heard a lot of people about like one good way to get in into really start something is, like you had mentioned, the low cost to entry. And obviously right now, as you're mentioning, prices, like going out and buying a herd is extremely expensive right now.
Totally.
So for somebody that's kind of getting into it, and when I get into it, I mean like being kind of in the position that you are, what would your advice be to them on the best ways to do it?
Well, I would say just do it. I love custom grazing, and I actually just did a workshop at Regenerate 2 days about this. But in my mind, you've got really low startup costs, right? You're going to need some fencing, maybe some water, portable tanks and hoses, or maybe you have live water. You need to know a large livestock or large animal vet, either A, to get meds, as in like antibiotics that require vet prescription, for them to come out for a farm call or just like in general kind of advice on health concerns and whatnot. But one of the things that I talked about is like in this presentation was like understanding what your cost of production is. And so you've got like your direct costs, which for us in our custom grazing enterprise is salt mineral. And we assume 1 cent a day per standard animal unit. So for a 1,000-pound cow, or you'd have to adjust it to like a 700-pound stalker, it would be like 0.7. We've seen from like the past 2 years and like after the fact going through inventory and whatnot that it's about 1 cent a day per 1,000 pounds. So you've got your direct costs, then you've got like your overhead. So that's going to be your time, your fencing, your invoicing, your insurance, maybe QuickBooks subscription, things like that. And then really from there, you would take that number of like, what's your total cost of production to like have this custom, and your land lease, sorry. What does it cost you to run them on the neighbor's place, whatnot? You divide that by like the carrying capacity or like the total amount of stock days or like how many animals you can run on that place. And it's going to give you some rate that's kind of like a break even. And so that's a great way to like understand how to like price your custom grazing. And there's like great resources through USDA and like national ag statistics on like what a straight graze lease would cost. And obviously you want to be like above that. But then there's like geographic things like, are you in the Nebraska Sandhills charging $3.50 a day for a cow? Or are you in Southern Colorado? Like no one here is going to pay that. Maybe people are paying $1.50 a day. So in my mind with the custom grazing, like finding a good client is super important and obviously someone that trusts you. And like we were able to then raise our rates going into our second and our third year once we had like built that reputation, even just after 1 year of saying like we put on 2.1 pounds a day on these animals. They were super pleased. We had really good communication and we still have animals that will die and there's doctoring that happens, but we're like keeping them informed of what's going on. And ultimately, like, if you can run those numbers beforehand, like, you obviously have a very predictable cash flow if you're charging on a per head, per day basis. So you can kind of know, like, what am I going to bring in custom grazing revenue? And then how much is my lease and how much is my labor? I think there's a lot of opportunity for a producer to, like, in year one, make that business cash flow and, like, make a little money and pay themselves.
Yeah, those are all really, really good points. How did the relationship come about? Did they approach you guys or did you guys approach them?
It's the client that we've now worked with for 3 years that we now have a joint venture with. Gosh, we cast a really wide net that first year, like to women in ranching and ranching for profit and just neighbors and whatnot. And we were actually at a neighbor's place when we were like talking about buying cattle, and he was like, gosh, have you heard of this cattle buyer out in eastern Colorado? And at the time we're like, oh, and anyways, we got talking to him and it turns out I actually do know him and his family, and I had been to a couple brandings in eastern Colorado and had met him. And so we gave him a call, and people are looking for grass, right? And a lot of times grass in the summer can be cheap grass, cheap gain. So we initially went over to a neighbor's place and he had give us the contact info for a cattle buyer out in eastern Colorado. And he's like, oh, well, he might know some folks that are looking for grass. And when we eventually got on the phone with him, it turns out that I did know these people and I had been to a couple brandings with them. And so once they kind of knew that I was a real person, I think that helped a little bit. They were like, well, can we come out to the ranch? And I think more than anything to verify kind of like the grass we had, the grass that we said we had, we did actually have and things like that. And so they came out and grass in the summer is cheap grass and cheap gain for stalkers. So I think they were eager to find something if it was real and was going to materialize. And when they came out to the ranch and thought that there was plenty of grass for what we were asking them to bring, we got a phone call from them later that afternoon saying that they would like to custom graze with us.
Yeah.
That's kind of how we lined that out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you mentioned sell by marketing, because I want to make sure that I don't forget to ask you this. And we had talked a little bit about it prior, but in terms of how you guys are using that, could you just explain a little bit about your experience with doing it? And I know this is like a broad question because it can be, the sell by marketing can be so in-depth and detailed. And I think on a lot of operations, that's really hard to do at times. You're fearful of changing things, right? Especially like in the middle of the season, or when you were explaining about, well, we're just shipping off 400 something cows. So you just explain a little bit about like your guys' approach and how you are able to make those quick decisions.
Totally. Yeah. I would say I bring up a little example, but in Executive Link, this program that we're in, Christy and I, there's this paradigm question. It's like, what's something that's like seemingly impossible that would make this insane difference for your business? And we're supposed to like come up with a question that would like make this huge thing. And it's funny because we always look at each other and people say stuff and we suggest stuff, and then we'll be like, yeah, but that doesn't really seem impossible. And so I think in a lot of ways, like Christy and I are very much on that same track of like flexibility in like every kind of like thread of our business. And I think being nimble is like totally a strength, and like, right, she owns the ranch, but it's not like she had grandpa's cows out here with the genetics he's poured into for 40 years and then this and this and this. And so really like we're excited about like running classes of cattle that like obviously we can advance, like add value to them. But also like animals that like meet kind of our ecological goals. And so like running stalkers in the summer, in my mind, makes a ton of sense because we can be quick with our strip grazing like every 3 to 5 days with poly wire. And we could move the herd, or like we had a water issue. And so we can walk them a couple miles, where if you've got cows that are actively calving, there's only like so much you can do with like intensive grazing and things like that, or changing that grazing plan around, or moving them to the other side of the ranch, or we've got to work them and things like that. And so, yeah, when we kind of pivoted in March, when those heifers just got too expensive for what we kind of had figured on them, like we were going to like start to be giving too much, where that would just like eat the profit out of what we had initially kind of factored in there and like run the numbers on. And so, yeah, with our like joint venture partner, I put that in air quotes because it's not a partnership, but with this joint venture person, they were also like, yeah, sitting in the sale barn and just like, I can't get anything bought. And so, yeah, I think just our ability to be not like stuck on, well, the plan was to get 500 heifers and like we're gonna buy them no matter what. Like we were able to like do a little like cost benefit analysis of like what's gonna be the extra labor on the ranch to run 2 separate herds this growing season. But then like what's kind of like the advantage from like the margin size of running a different class of livestock, and like can we get them bought? And so I think ultimately like not letting those like emotions or like plans get in the way of like what are the numbers saying. And I think I'm quite young and I've got a lot of experience, but I still have a ton more experience to get out there. And so I think looking at the numbers, something that's like quite concrete, is like really been a way for us to feel confident like in our decision making when we are saying, okay, well, we are going to pivot like 180 degrees like today, and these animals are coming next week.
Yeah. I mean, that's like pretty incredible that you guys have been able to do that. I have so many questions that we could get into about all of the detail that you guys are doing. Such an important part of this is your numbers. I went to Ranching for Profit 3 years ago now, and that was a huge takeaway, is like really looking at your numbers and seeing what you're doing. And like one of my biggest missions is how can I make ranching profitable wherever I'm at?
Totally.
Keeping track of those numbers is not just data, but you make your decisions on it. On a ranch, you're making decisions 2 years down the road all the time, right? How am I going to come out on top and profitable? And I don't know a ton about sell by marketing. I have not taken the class. I hope to take the class. I think I might take one in the spring, but I've listened to a lot of podcasts and people talking about it and everything. So I know that that's completely numbers driven.
I would say with the sell by marketing, that you have to like it or love it and like totally get engrossed in it. Because I think that's super important to like stay in the market, not like, oh, I just topped out and I sold these at an all-time high and now I gotta wait until things like simmer down. That's like definitely not the right mentality to have about it. So I think like either having the right partners, like do you have a fantastic order buyer and you have a great relationship there where they're getting the cattle that you need to be getting bought correctly? Are you sitting in the sale barn? Like, what are the logistics kind of there? How are you marketing these cattle? And like all these things really have to come together. And so I'd say we're like super in the introductory beginning phases of it, but it's been really exciting. And part of the reason we actually have a joint venture with the person or the folks that we do is because they bring a lot of like specialty to some of that like buying and marketing side that we have less experience with. And it was funny, Christy and I have asked our joint venture partner, and we're like, why on earth would you even want to like do this with us? And he was just super excited about like the quality of care that we have for the cattle and like the land, and that really just like shows through the gain on these animals and like the health of the ranch and things like that. And so it just like communication and like we're excited to look at these numbers and be thinking about things critically. And so it's like totally made sense, but we we also have friends and folks that we know that have done the sell by courses and like can crunch the numbers, but like almost have like analysis paralysis where then it's like taking it to that step of like buying the cattle like doesn't quite happen or can be very daunting.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. Of just you can it's really easy to go to the course and learn everything, and then you get back home and you're like, how do I do this?
Yep, totally. Totally.
Thank you for explaining that. So I just have a few more questions for Fiona, because I don't want to take up too much of your time. But what do you feel like some of the major challenges facing producers today? There's obviously a lot of obvious answers to that, but if you just want to, from your perspective, what do you see being the biggest challenges for producers, one, right now, and then what do you think some of the biggest obstacles are for people getting into the cattle industry? Maybe they want to, so this is a two-part question. Maybe they want to get into the cattle industry. Maybe they are in it, but they want to grow bigger. Or maybe they're just starting out. What would your advice be to people to get into it?
I think just the flexibility, right? Like, just because, like, what do they say? Like, or planning is imperative, plans are useless, or something like that. Like, it is so important to be like doing the work in your business, like that $100 an hour work versus the $30 an hour work on the back of a horse, to like really be thinking about your ranch or your business as a business. But I think having the flexibility and like not being afraid of doing things differently than what your neighbors are doing. Like, an example, we've had a neighbor tell my boyfriend or tell someone like, oh, like, it's a wildfire hazard how much grass Redwing leaves on their place. Like, that thing should be like mowed down like most of the folks around us do. And just like the attitude there is quite different than like we're like, well, like we've left some cover on the ground for the winter, and like we're gonna be able to get that grass growing a little sooner in the spring, and we're okay like hopefully increasing all these other things. And their view might just be like, gosh, they're going to be the ones that caused the wildfire to jump to my place. And so I think not being afraid to be doing things a little bit differently than your neighbors. And, yeah, let's say, what else? I just like knowing your context too, right? Like, okay, should I be custom grazing? Okay, should I be custom grazing stalkers or pears or whatever it might be? But saying like, do I have the country or the type of grass where I can put on good gain? Or am I stalking these animals in the right season, right? Like, yeah, we're running stalkers and yeah, we're putting on about 2 pounds a day, but we're definitely not doing that in the winter, right? Like, I want a mature animal where that's just maintaining weight if we're putting something on the ranch without offering any supplemental protein or feed. So I'd say like just being flexible and knowing your context. And I've been so fortunate to have so many people like go out of their way and help me for no reason that I can figure out. Like I had a neighbor in Eastern Colorado teach me how to ride a horse, and we still stay in contact, and I feel like I never gave him anything in return, but just the amount of people that are willing to like assist and lend a hand has been incredible. And I'd say like being a part of your community, whatever that looks like, whether that's helping out with work days or doing something with the school or with the community center, like I think that goes a long ways, especially if you're in a community that's got older folks that's like pre-established and you're coming in as the new person.
Yeah, that's great advice, and kind of segues into what I wanted to talk to you about too, of like when I came to Redwing, one of the things that struck me the most about you was how positive and encouraging you are to people. And I think you were either talking to somebody else or somebody was mentioning that you had helped them with something. I can't remember which one it was, but I just remember you coming in. We were all sitting in the kitchen and you're like, what do you mean you can do this and stuff? And you were always just so positive. So where do you get that mindset? But have you always been that way? And like, what helps you continue on to have that mindset? Because obviously you have done a lot in your career so far, and to me, looking at you, and I don't, we don't know each other well, but you've really come such a long way. And from knowing that and I say a long way because a lot of times I think people are like, if you didn't grow up in this, you don't have enough experience. So I mean, in that sense. So you've gone to where you are because of that. And have you always felt really confident? Have you always kind of had this mindset? And yeah, I'll end it there.
Well, thanks, Lauren. That's totally a compliment. Yeah, I would say in my mind, like attitude is everything, and just like doing the work that you said you're gonna do goes a long ways. And like learning as I'm going and not being afraid to ask for help or ask for more instruction or ask for something different has, I think, taken me a long way. I think I just get excited about like being like hype woman for anyone and everyone. And I like truly feel like there's a space for anyone in ranching if they're like willing to do the work, like willing to like have a good attitude. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be easy, but I think there's space for everyone. And I've always just like had a good attitude, and maybe I'm like overly confident and too not aggressive, but just like maybe aggressive. But I'm just excited about things, and I think making sure that others at least have someone in their court to say like, you can fucking do this. I mean, you got to work hard and you got to want it, but you can do it. Can be a little thing I can do that doesn't cost me anything, but maybe that could be the difference between them trying to do a custom grazing enterprise or taking a job in a coffee shop because now they're not really sure they had like a hurdle in their past ranching job.
Yeah. And that's such a good point. And I love that you bring that part up of you have to really want it, because I think when it comes to ranching, it's a different beast in itself compared to going out and getting a corporate 9 to 5 job, right? It's not easy, and it's not easy to get into it if you haven't had a lot of experience in some ways. And then it can be hard to stay in it, in the sense of, if you're kind of teetering on whether or not I want to do this, those hard days are going to be extra hard, because you really have to want to be in it on the days that are just going to like toss you in the dirt and you're crawling back to the house, you know?
Yeah. I think if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, right? And I guess I want to also do a plug for the new agrarian program. This is Redwing's second year and my second year of being a mentor, and that has been a super exciting endeavor at the ranch, of just getting folks that have minimal to zero ranching experience just like excited about ranching, getting them the hard skills that they need to ultimately, after the apprenticeship at Redwing, go get a full-time job. And I've told both of our apprentices, both this year and last year, I said, I will not give you any professional reference for a job that I do not think you should have. And I mean that sincerely. Like, you aren't going to get another seasonal position, or then you're moving in 6 months, or you're not going to just not work in the winter because it's hard to find a ranching job. Like, I am committed, and I am confident that you're going to leave here with a full-time job lined up. And if not, I feel like I haven't done my job right. So that's been something exciting for me, is just like people management, and like with myself and managing up with my boss. So that ultimately just like the mentorship and having a young team at the ranch. Yeah, it's been exciting.
Yeah. And, you know, when I went to Redwing, I loved how it was such a community there. All of the girls that you had working there was a team of powerhouse women. And it was just the coolest thing to see. I think when we went out to one of your pastures and you're like, yeah, we're digging I think you guys were putting in a water pump or tank or something. I can't remember. But basically had the excavator like in, I think you guys showed me a picture of like Aaron maybe had the excavator in a gigantic hole. Yeah. It was just awesome.
Yeah, that was we were digging the pit for the 10,000 gallon storage tank we were burying.
Okay,
that was a project.
So that's, yeah, it just speaks to you, especially as the manager, the stage that you're setting, and you can really feel it when you get to the ranch. And I know that I saw that when I was there. And even you had mentioned the care of the animals and the quality and things like that. Like you can definitely see that in your operation. So
Hey.
well, thank you for speaking on that. All right, so just 2 final questions, even though I said that before. But if you could name a favorite book or resource, it doesn't have to be anything specific, but about life or grazing or business, what would be a resource that you would recommend to people?
First, No Risk Ranching, the book by Greg Judy, is a phenomenal resource about custom grazing, and he goes into the nitty-gritty. That's a must-read for a new and beginner rancher. And then the Ranchonomics podcast, hosted by John Haskell with Ranch Right LLC, is a phenomenal podcast. All things really like business for your ranch, which I love.
Awesome. Thank you. So one final question that I always like to ask people, and you can take it in whatever direction you feel like, but what do you know for sure?
I know for sure that, hands down, the community in the ranching industry is my absolute favorite part.
I love that.
So, from brandings to helping neighbors take cattle off the mountains to talking about numbers to sharing meals, like that is my favorite thing by far.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something like no other. For sure. Because I think there's such a connection, because you know you're in it and they're in it. And I feel like I've experienced that myself too. Anybody is willing to help you, no matter what. You call the neighbor and running down to the cows are out, like, I need some help. And they got 1,000,005 things to do. But when you've got good neighbors and people that get it, they'll be willing to help.
They show up. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a really good point. All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Fiona. If there's anything else you'd like to share that I didn't ask, feel free to do so. But I really appreciate you coming on and speaking to us today and learning more about you and your operation and all of the advice that you gave. It was wonderful. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Lauren. Super excited to come on the podcast.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Fiona.
Bye.